Good afternoon. Welcome to Warriors, Hard Chargers, and Patriots. Little dots connecting to the big dots. I wanted to tell you an interesting story. It happened to me when I was executive officer on USS GEORGE Washington. You've heard the phrase, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. Well, life wasn't giving me lemons at one particular point in this tour. It was a heavy, very busy tour. But lemons were sort of getting in the way of me making the lemonade that I needed to, so that I could feel like I'd come to a fruition, a completion of a particular set of tasks. I was working long days. A lot of it self-imposed, I'll admit. I mean, I was probably my own worst enemy at times. But nonetheless, I was working pretty hard. And I just got burned out to a point where I was just done. I mean, things on the ship were going all right, but my family life was paying for it. There were just other things that were just getting in the way of me feeling like I was truly making a difference. And these were things that were going on in my brain. So I decided to write a letter of resignation. My intention was to resign from the U.S. Navy. That would have been at about the 22-year mark, I think, and go do something else. I needed to get out of this. I didn't feel like I could do any more than I was already doing to make the Navy and the ship and my sailors all better, all at once. Had to be, they all had to occur sort of simultaneously. So I wrote this letter of resignation in all the formal context that is required by the Navy's manual that tells you how to do these sorts of things. And I attached an addendum, and the addendum had like 18 separate line items of why I wanted to leave the Navy. It was, I don't know if addendums are normally written in letters of resignation, but I really wanted to get down to some finite details to why I felt like it was time for me to go home. So I submitted the letter up my chain of command to my commanding officer, and he forwarded it to the Admiral over at Naval Air Forces Atlantic at the time. It was I think a 3-star position. And so this was like in 1992-ish or so. So, but he also, luckily for me, was a very dear and valued mentor of mine. He'd flown with me in helicopters numerous times. He was our battle group commander on Coral Sea when I had HS-17 on board. And he used to go flying with me all the time, and we had a great time with each other. And he was kind enough to offer me counsel and advice when I needed it or when I asked for it. In this particular instance, it's probably more of when I needed it. He had got the letter. It was a Friday afternoon. I got a phone call from his office, and he said, the typical thing is stand by for the Admiral. I stood by for the Admiral. He goes on, Dave, he says, got your letter, reading it here, and I want you to do something for me this weekend, and we're going to have a discussion on Monday. I want you to go home and take this list of 18 items here, and on a piece of paper, I want you to give me some detail about what you did to fix each of those items. And if I read all 18 of those with you on Monday, and you did this and that and everything possible under the sun, and you just don't feel like there's any more that can be done, and you're still wanting to resign, I'll approve your letter of resignation. So I went home that weekend. I went through these items with some detail, and really it didn't take me long to come to the conclusion that I probably was whining, probably more than anything else, and that I really hadn't yet done everything within my power to go solve those problems. I mean, it might have taken some courage in some particular instances. Maybe I was going to upset somebody's apple cart getting there, but I felt, as I finished reading these things and working on it over the weekend, that if I truly loved the Navy and I loved my sailors, which I did, then I had to, I had to take the risk of upsetting somebody's apple cart and trying to go fix whatever those things were. So I went back in and had a discussion with him on Monday morning. I asked if he would just hold on to the letter, give me an opportunity to go fix the wrongs that I felt were out there. And the rest is history in that particular regard, as I was in the Navy for another 8 years and thankful to be there. So, all right, so there's a story. But what I took out of that was, I was thinking about this. What if I asked people around me that worked for me to write letters of resignation anonymously, no names attached. Just write I could read a letter of resignation to them, but give me the addendum. I'm interested in the addendum. And so the addendums would come, and I never really got there to do that while I was in the Navy. That was just something I just didn't have time to sort of group together. I mean, I had two other commands, three other commands after that. And it would have been really, quite frankly, in retrospect, a great opportunity for me to understand what the lay of the land was. Probably the quickest way for me to understand what the lay of the land was in terms of issues and with regard to policy and just the overall health of the tribe. But I did use it, and this is why I wanted to talk about today. I did use it in a couple of consulting gigs I had with a couple of companies who were trying to do an analysis of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis, often referred to as a SWOT analysis, about where their company was health-wise in each of those areas, their strengths, what their perceived weaknesses were, where they thought their opportunities were, and where the threats were coming from. Oftentimes, and in these two instances I want to talk to you about, there were disconnects between the C-suite, between the department heads, between, say, the division officers, and certainly then down between the factory workers. There are various levels of fracture, if you will, isolation in some regards. So I went into these two different companies. It almost worked the same in both cases, and we would work through a SWOT matrix at the department head level, and do it the normal way that it's done, and sit down and whiteboard things and put things and have people come up and write things in each of those blocks of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and that would populate some of these pages to begin with. But not everybody was going to get a say in what was going on there. So I went to those aforementioned levels of these two companies, and I said, I want you to write me a letter. It's anonymous. You're going to put it in an envelope. We're going to seal it. And I'm just going to extract, and all you're going to do, no names, nothing. I'm going to go back and I'm going to put those items in buckets, and I'm going to apply those buckets to those strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats areas. And I'm going to highlight them by color as to what level in the chain of command these things were coming from. If there was consistency from the lowest levels all the way to the top, then that would tell me one thing. The most troubling, and what often I saw, was that there was a big difference of opinion in terms of the things were bothering these people so much that they felt either that they couldn't get them done, or they could, but no one would listen to them. And so if there's a fracture, say, between the people on the factory floor and people that are in the C-suite, then that tells me a lot as well, because it talks to me about communication, talks to me about the lack of trust, lack of credibility. So all of that would come and be rolled up into a presentation back to the CEO. And a lot of times the CEOs were in denial. Well, a lot of times. I mean, I only got to do this twice, but my opinion was that they were both in denial. And I just, but I basically told them what I did at the end, and they really had to deal with this now, because they understood that there were some things that are color-coded that now were, maybe one or two of those tiers from the factory floor to the division officer sort of people, department heads, and C-suite. C-suite didn't get involved in the actual writing of letters. It would have been interesting to do that, but they were actually the customer here, if you will. Then it was, we presented to the chains of command, and they were in denial in some things. They refused to address some things in others, but some of them were so broad and so massive in terms of the numbers of levels and the numbers of people that had common things in the buckets that I mentioned, that they had to address them. So it actually helped them develop a better business process and a better strategic plan. And of course, the SWOT matrix became an actionable item because out of all those things were listed, we spent a couple of days actually going through and saying, all right, what are we going to do to fix this problem? What are we going to do to enhance that strength? What are we going to do to leverage the opportunities that are out there? And what are we going to do to make sure that we're established in the right way so that we can combat the threats out there effectively as well? Now, there are two companies that come to my mind. One was had a competition for a armored vehicle for the Army, and they had held this contract for over a decade, and now they were in competition with a different company, someone that's never been into that space before, and the C-suite people just felt like they didn't really have to worry about it. They didn't have to compete. The people on the factory floor were worried about it because they saw what they were building. They understood a little bit about what the other company was making. And there was concern, actually more concern there, a little less concern at the division officer level, a little less concern even at the department head level. But the very tactical levels, people were worried that they were not getting the job done and they were not building a good enough product to win. And they didn't win. They lost. So they had a contract that was a moneymaker for them for over a decade, and all of a sudden that contract was gone. I sort of think that the Boeing scenario that's going on right now is sort of like that. You know, you have to wonder how such a wonderful company who's built airplanes for so long, good airplanes, great airplanes for so long, is now having the challenges that they're having. And in my mind, it always felt like that the CEO, it was out of touch with what was really happening on the factory floor. You know, to the point where people down there just didn't trust him, and they probably wondered if where was his head at when things started sort of crumbling down. Because I would argue that what I would read when I saw some of these things at the lower factory floor level is that there was a lot more fidelity, a lot earlier. The various infractions or issues that would be of concern that need repair or fixing was more evident to them in many instances a lot earlier than they were at the various levels. So it worked out really well. I would encourage you, if you ever have the courage, not courage, I mean, there has to be buy-in by your team to go do this. But I learned a lot by doing this with these two companies, and it made it a lot easier for me to really get down to ground truth. My only challenge was that they had to trust me that once I took it out of that piece of paper, which again didn't have their name or any other identifying features on it, took it and moved it, transposed it over onto the butcher block pieces of paper for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, that I would basically put them in a paper shredder, which I did, and they would never be seen again. And then, we had everyone together, and they were able to come up and manipulate, write little comments on each one of those. And if they chose, then they could put their initials saying, hey, I want to amplify in this, or yeah, I agree with this, or whatever. It's just so you could understand that there were others that were either hesitated to write about one particular thing or another, but chose to go do this anyway, and they wanted to amplify and agree or add consensus to what they saw on this piece of paper. It was pretty powerful. So if ever I given the opportunity again, I would do it the same way. I would try to sit down and look at the various big buckets, strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats. But then I would invite these people to go ahead and go back to their offices or rooms or wherever we're at in the privacy of a space, and think long and hard about what bothers them enough that it could be a precipitant for them to write a real letter. I mean, not suggesting that any of them would or should, but what are those precipitants that are gnawing at you every day? Pretty cool stuff. It turned out to be a useful tool. I went back and told that Admiral who gave me the task about this, and he just started laughing a little bit because he said, well, it worked on you and it worked on them, and he's 100% right. So, I got rid of my lemons, or rather, I basically took those lemons, the ones that I put in front of me, and I chose to go make that lemonade, and life was great after that. I've learned now always to sit down and make lists of things that bother me, and then come back and make sure that I've done everything I can to fix them. And then if I have a frustration over a particular task or a particular strategic nuance that is just bothering me, I should tell somebody about it, which I did thereafter, and why it's bothering me and why I don't feel empowered, or are you going to empower me to let me go fix that problem? Good stuff. Great day. Another 3,500 meters in the pool. Life is so good. and I enjoy having these conversations. I hope they're useful to you too. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.